2 weeks before, I was scheduled to sign the power of attorney, transferring control of my finances and property to my son-in-law. I went in for my regular Thursday appointment at the physical therapy clinic on Birchwood Avenue. I had been going to Cornerstone Physical Therapy for 14 months, ever since the hip replacement. My therapist was a woman named Priya, early 40s, practical, not given to small talk, which I appreciated. She had seen me at my worst, shuffling along the parallel bars the first week, and at my most stubborn, which was most other weeks. She knew I had lost my husband. She knew I lived alone. She knew the kind of things you learn about a person when you spend an hour twice a week watching them try to move without wincing. I arrived that Thursday a few minutes early. The waiting area was empty. The receptionist, a young man I recognized but whose name I could never remember, was on a call with his back turned. I settled into one of the chairs near the hallway that led to the treatment rooms and pulled out the crossword I always brought with me. That's when I heard them. The supply room was directly to my left, separated from the waiting area by a door that had been left open just enough. 2 voices, low and close. A man's voice I recognized immediately, my son-in-law Trevor, and a woman's voice I did not recognize at first, measured and clipped, reading from something. The durable POA gives you full financial authority the moment she signs. Bank accounts, investment accounts, the property on Clearwater Drive, all of it becomes accessible for management at your discretion, Trevor said, and she can't undo it once it's active. Not without a competency hearing. And given the documentation we're building, that's going to be very difficult for her to initiate on her own. I set the crossword down on my knee. My hands were very still. Trevor said, "Rebecca keeps asking about the timeline. She needs to know before the end of the month." The woman said, "The signing is in 2 weeks. Once it's executed, I'd give it 30 days to establish the management pattern. After that, any challenge she raises gets filtered through you first. That's the whole point of the structure." I heard a phone buzz. The woman said she had to take it. Footsteps. A different door, further down the hall, opened and closed. I was still sitting in the same chair when Priya came out to get me. She took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" I could not speak for a moment. I pointed at the supply room door. Priya looked at it, looked at me, and then quietly pulled the waiting room door shut and sat down in the chair beside me. "Tell me," she said. I told her what I had heard. She listened with her hands folded in her lap and her face very still, and when I finished she said, "I need to tell you something. A man has been in our supply room twice in the past week. He told the receptionist he was waiting for a patient. I didn't think to ask which patient." She paused. I should have. "It wasn't your fault," I said. "No," she said, "but I'm telling you now." I drove home along Birchwood and turned onto the county road and did not stop until I was in my own driveway, under the oak tree that Harold and I had planted the spring after we moved in 31 years ago. I sat in the car for a long time. My daughter, Rebecca, 44 years old, she had called me every Sunday for 23 years, through the pregnancies and the miscarriage and Harold's illness and the 2 years after. She had been the one who suggested the power of attorney last fall, sitting across from me at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold between hands, telling me gently that it was just a precaution, just something to have in place, that she and Trevor only wanted to make sure I was protected. I had been touched. Trevor had been the one to find the attorney, a man named Caldwell, in an office park off Route 9 that I had never been to before. I had met with Caldwell twice. He was pleasant, efficient, and had never once explained what durable financial power of attorney actually meant in practice. I had assumed I understood it. I had not asked enough questions. I had trusted. The house was the one Harold and I had bought when Rebecca was 3 years old. A white Cape Cod on 2 acres, out on Clearwater Drive in Hendricks County, Indiana, with a vegetable garden in the back and a porch that caught the afternoon light in a way that had made Harold say, the day we first walked through it that he wanted to drink his coffee there every morning for the rest of his life. He had. For 28 years, he had done exactly that. I had $340,000 in a retirement account and about $290,000 in home equity. Harold's life insurance had been a separate $200,000, which I had never touched and had not told anyone the full amount of, except my accountant. Before the end of the month, Trevor had said. I went inside and made tea and did not drink it. I called my friend Wanda first. Wanda Briggs had been my closest friend since the year our daughters were in the same second-grade class, and she had seen me through every difficult thing in the past 30 years, including 2 of them she hadn't been invited to help with but showed up for anyway. She answered before the second ring. I told her everything. She did not interrupt, which is the thing I love most about Wanda. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You need to call Martin Ochoa." Martin Ochoa had handled Harold's estate. He was in his early 60s, methodical, and had a reputation in our county for not letting things slide that other attorneys would file away and forget. I had not spoken to him in 3 years. His assistant answered, and I told her it was urgent. Martin called me back within the hour. I went through it all again. The supply room, the voices, Trevor's name, Rebecca, Caldwell, the signing date, the woman's voice reading from something about competency hearings. Martin was quiet on the other end. I could hear him writing. When I finished, he said, "Do not sign anything in 2 weeks. Do not say anything to Rebecca or Trevor that suggests you know what you heard. Can you be in my office tomorrow at 9?" I said yes. I slept in the armchair in the living room that night, the one Harold had brought home from an estate sale in 2003, because I had admired it at a friend's house, and he had found one like it at a fraction of the price. It was the chair I always went to when something was too large to process in a regular room. The bedroom felt too specific. The kitchen felt too open. The armchair felt like the right size for what I was carrying. I lay there and thought about the timeline. Rebecca had first brought up the power of attorney last October, 8 months ago. Around the same time, I had started occasionally forgetting small things, a dentist appointment I had to reschedule, a Tuesday I had meant to call my accountant and hadn't. Nothing alarming, things I had attributed to grief, to the adjustment of living alone after 40 years of not being alone, things I had mentioned to Rebecca in passing because she asked every Sunday how I was really doing, and I had always told her the truth. I thought about who knew about those small lapses. Rebecca, Trevor, and Dr. Whitmore, my general practitioner, whom I had seen for my annual physical in November at Rebecca's suggestion because she had read something about cognitive health in women over 60 and wanted me to have a baseline. I thought about baselines. I thought about what a baseline would be useful for if someone later needed to document a pattern. Martin's office was downtown, above a flooring showroom on the square, with a parking lot in the back and a waiting room that smelled like coffee and old paper. He met me at the door. The first thing he did was read the power of attorney document that Caldwell had prepared. He read it twice, slowly, without expression. Then he set it on the desk and put his finger on a paragraph near the bottom of the second page. "This language here," he said. "This grants Trevor irrevocable management authority over all listed assets upon execution. It also includes a clause allowing him to designate a secondary agent without your consent." He looked at me. "Did Caldwell explain this to you?" "No." "Did Rebecca?" "No." He set the document aside. "Tell me about the woman's voice, the one reading from something." I told him what I remembered, the measured tone, the specific language, the reference to a competency hearing, the phrase documentation we're building. Martin wrote something on his legal pad. He said, "I want to find out who that woman is, and I want to know more about Caldwell." He wrote a name on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. "Diane Sutter. She worked financial crimes with the state attorney's office for 18 years before she retired and went into private investigation. She's the person I call when I need someone thorough and discreet." I took the paper. "What do I tell Rebecca?" I asked. "Nothing that raises concern. Call her tonight and tell her you've been feeling a little off this week. Tired, nothing specific. Say you may need to push the signing. She'll tell you not to rush." He was right. Rebecca said exactly that. Her voice was warm and patient the way it always was, and she said, "Mom, there's no pressure at all, just rest. We can reschedule." I sat holding the phone after we hung up and tried to locate the feeling underneath the warmth and could not be certain what I found. Diane Sutter drove a 10-year-old Subaru and wore reading glasses on a cord around her neck and had the kind of face that people don't remember immediately after she's left the room, which she told me without smiling was professionally useful. She arrived at my house at 8 the following morning with a notepad and a travel mug of coffee and listened to me without once looking at her phone. When I finished, she said, "The document. May I make a copy?" I gave her the folder. She said, "I'll need Caldwell's full name and bar number, Trevor's employer, and the name of the woman you heard if you have anything more to go on, and any documentation you have of communications related to the power of attorney, emails, texts, letters." I had printed everything from my inbox the night before. I gave her the stack. She stood at my door to leave and said, "One question. Your daughter. Do you believe she understands the full scope of what she and her husband were planning, or do you think she believes this is a genuine protection arrangement?" I thought about Rebecca's voice on the phone, the patience in it, the Sunday calls, the flowers she had sent on my birthday every year since Harold died. I said, "That's the thing I most need to know." Diane nodded. "Then that's the right question." She left. Wonder came over that evening. We sat at the kitchen table and went through 14 months of documents Caldwell had sent me, the initial consultation letter, the draft POA, the revised draft, the management addendum, the signing confirmation. We laid them out in order on the table, and as we did, the structure of it became visible in a way it hadn't been when I had read each one separately. Each document was slightly more complex than the last. Each one built logically on the one before it. Each one moved a little more authority, a little further from me and toward Trevor, and the language that did it was buried 4 and 5 paragraphs deep in sections that began with words like standard provisions and administrative continuity. Wanda said, "Someone who knows how these documents work built this. This didn't come from Caldwell." At 10:15 that night, Diane texted, "Found several things. Can you have your attorney there tomorrow at 1? Martin arrived at 12:50. Diane arrived at 1 exactly. She set a thin leather folder on my kitchen table, opened it, and placed 3 separate documents in front of us. The first was about Caldwell. He had a disciplinary record with the Indiana State Bar, a 2019 complaint from a client in Terre Haute, a 71-year-old woman who had signed a similar power of attorney arrangement and lost access to her own bank accounts for 11 months before her nephew hired an outside attorney to intervene. The complaint had been resolved with a private reprimand. Nothing was on Caldwell's public record, but the pattern was there. Martin leaned forward. He picked up the document and read it twice. "The structure Caldwell prepared for you," he said, not looking up, "mirrors the Terre Haute arrangement almost exactly. The secondary agent clause, the irrevocable language, the buried management provisions." The second document was about the woman whose voice I had heard in the supply room. Diane had identified her from the clinic's visitor log, which the receptionist, after some gentle questions, had confirmed. Her name was Paulette Voss. She was a paralegal, not an attorney. She had worked at an estate planning firm in Cincinnati from 2015 to 2020, and Diane had spoken off the record to a former colleague there. Paulette had left the firm following questions about client documents that had been altered after signing. Nothing had been prosecuted. Nothing was on her official record, but she had known exactly how to read that language in the supply room because she had written language like it before. The third document was the one that made the room go quiet. Diane said, "I spoke with the woman from Terre Haute. Her name is June. She's 73. She lost $178,000 in account fees and unauthorized transfers before her nephew intervened. Her case is technically closed. Diane paused. I also found 2 other arrangements in the past 4 years involving Caldwell's office, the same irrevocable POA structure, clients who were women over 65 living alone, with adult children presented as the primary advocates. She stopped. One of those women now has a court-appointed guardian. Her house was sold 18 months ago. The room was very still. I looked at the table. I said, "Was Rebecca involved in the Cincinnati situation with Paulette?" Diane shook her head. She and Trevor married in 2016, the year after Paulette left that firm. As far as I can determine, Trevor met Paulette through a mutual contact and brought her in to advise on the document structure. I don't have evidence that Rebecca knew who Paulette was or what her history was. And Rebecca, Martin said carefully. "What do you have on her direct involvement?" Diane said. "She signed one communication as a co-designee on the POA. She initiated the referral to Caldwell. She appears to have framed the arrangement to Trevor as routine elder planning." She paused. Whether she understood what the document actually enabled is the part I cannot determine from the outside. Martin said, "What do you want to do?" I had been sitting with that question since the night I had lain in Harold's armchair and felt the shape of it forming. I had thought about calling Rebecca alone before anything else. I had thought about simply cancelling the signing and letting it dissolve without a confrontation. I had thought about the ways to handle this that didn't require anyone to say the truth out loud in a room full of people. And then I thought about June in Terre Haute, 73 years old, who had lost $178,000, and the woman with the court-appointed guardian, and whoever came after me if nothing was documented, nothing was reported, nothing was put on a record that could be used. I said, "I want to reschedule the signing for Sunday afternoon at my house. Tell them I've had a change of heart about coming downtown. I want to sign somewhere I feel comfortable. Invite Rebecca and Trevor and Caldwell." Martin looked at me carefully. "And then we finish it," I said. The signing was scheduled for 2 o'clock Sunday. I spent Saturday morning in the garden, pulling the last of the summer growth back from the fence line the way Harold had always done before the first frost. I made his chicken and rice soup for dinner and ate it at the kitchen table with the radio on, the way I had been eating alone for 2 years, and I sat with Harold's photograph on the bookshelf across the room and told him what was happening and what I was about to do. Wanda arrived at noon on Sunday and sat in the living room. My neighbor Roy, 68 years old, retired state trooper, the person I trusted most on this street, arrived at 12:30 and took the armchair near the window. Martin was already at the table with a colleague from his office. Diane sat in the corner with her folder closed on her knee. At 1:50, I heard tires on the gravel. I stood at the kitchen window and watched Rebecca and Trevor come up the front walk. Trevor had a leather portfolio. Rebecca was wearing the grey cardigan she put on when she wanted to seem at ease. Caldwell's car pulled in behind them, a dark blue sedan, the kind that blends in everywhere. I opened the front door and smiled. Rebecca hugged me. She smelled like the lavender soap she had used since college, the kind I used to buy for her stockings every Christmas. She said, "You look good, Mom." "Feeling better?" "Much better," I said. "Come in. I made soup." Caldwell shook my hand and surveyed the room with the practiced calm of someone who believed the next hour would proceed without difficulty. I led them to the dining room. The table was set, the documents laid out, the afternoon light coming through the window the way Harold had always loved it. Martin and Wanda and Roy were seated along the far wall. Caldwell's eyes moved across the room and settled briefly on Martin before he recovered his expression. "Margaret," Caldwell said, "I don't believe I know all of your guests." "No," I said, "you don't." I sat at the head of the table. Rebecca sat to my left, Trevor beside her. Caldwell took the chair directly across from me and set his briefcase on the floor with the confidence of a man who had done this many times before. "Before we begin," he said, "I like to walk my clients through the document one final time. I'd like to say something first," I said. He nodded graciously. I looked at my daughter. She was watching me with an expression I recognized, the patient, careful attention she had always given me when she thought I was about to say something she would need to redirect gently. "Harold sat at this table the month before he died," I said, "and told me the only thing he was afraid of was leaving me without enough protection. He said, 'Maggie, you always took care of everyone else first. Promise me you'll take care of yourself.' I promised him." Rebecca's face softened. Trevor nodded slowly. "I kept that promise," I said. "This week." Silence. I nodded to Diane. She opened her folder and placed 3 documents on the table. I looked at Caldwell. 3 months ago, you prepared a power of attorney document with irrevocable financial authority and a secondary agent clause that transfers management control without my consent. You did not explain either of those provisions to me in our meetings, not once. I looked at Trevor. "You don't know those provisions are in there, because no one told you." Trevor looked at Caldwell. "What does she mean?" Caldwell said, "Margaret, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the document's scope. If we review it together." Martin said quietly but clearly, "The irrevocable authority clause is on page 3, section 2.4, embedded in a paragraph that begins with the words standard continuity provisions. This same clause appears in a power of attorney document prepared by your office for a client in Terre Haute in 2010, which resulted in a disciplinary complaint with the Indiana State Bar." Trevor stared at Caldwell. I opened the first document and turned it toward Trevor. Caldwell's name at the top. The Terre Haute case. The bar complaint. 2 other arrangements, 2 other women. Same structure, same sequence. Trevor's face went still. His portfolio sat in front of him unopened. I said, "I want to tell you about Paulette Voss." Rebecca's hands were flat on the table. 2 weeks ago, I said, a woman named Paulette Voss within the supply room at my physical therapy clinic with my son-in-law, reading from a document about competency hearings and documentation timelines. She was describing how to make it difficult for me to revoke this power of attorney once I signed it. Before she helped structure this arrangement, Paulette worked at an estate planning firm in Cincinnati, where she left after questions about altered client documents. She knows exactly how to write language that transfers authority in ways clients don't understand until it's too late. Caldwell said, "I think this meeting has gotten away from its purpose." Roy said, from the corner, "I'd stay seated if I were you." He said it quietly. The way men who have spent 30 years in law enforcement say things that are not suggestions. Rebecca said, "Mom," and stopped. I looked at my daughter directly for the first time since they had arrived. Her expression was composed, carefully composed, the way a person looks when they have prepared for the possibility of this moment and decided that composure was their best position. I said, "You introduced Trevor to Caldwell. You suggested this arrangement. You framed it to him as protecting me because Trevor loves me and would do anything he believed protected me. You used that." Rebecca said, "That is not, I only wanted a woman in Terre Haute," I said, "is 73 years old and lost $178,000 through an arrangement structured by this same office with this same document language. Another woman, somewhere in the state, has a court-appointed guardian now. Her house was sold 1.5 years ago. I stopped. Neither of them did anything wrong. They trusted the people who were supposed to love them. The room was quiet in a way that rooms rarely are. I said, "I am 68 years old. I taught school for 24 years. I raised a daughter and buried a husband and have managed every year of my life since then on my own, with full clarity, without anyone's assistance. I forget a dentist appointment sometimes. I misplace my reading glasses. So does every person at this table. That is not decline. that is being alive. And no one in this room or anywhere else has the standing to call it otherwise. Martin stood. He said, "Mr. Hev Caldwell, you are being referred to the Indiana State Bar's Disciplinary Division for investigation of elder financial exploitation and document fraud. A formal complaint has been filed this morning. Paulette Voss is being referred separately." He looked at Trevor. "Your involvement is currently under review, though at this time the evidence indicates you were not aware of the full scope of the arrangement." He looked at Rebecca. He did not say anything. 2 officers from the county sheriff's financial crimes unit came to the front door. I had not heard them arrive. Roy let them in. Caldwell left with them, still holding his briefcase, looking considerably smaller than he had when he came through my front door. Trevor did not move. He was looking at the document on the table, at Caldwell's name printed at the top, at the paragraphs Martin had marked with a yellow tab. Rebecca looked at Trevor. Something in her expression shifted. The composure thinned, and underneath it was something raw and less prepared. She said, "I thought we needed this. You know what we owe. You know how long we've been—" Trevor said, "Stop." She stopped. She picked up her bag. She walked past me to the front door without looking at my face, and she let herself out, and I listened to her car back out of the gravel drive. The room was quiet for a long time. Wanda put her hand on my shoulder. Roy poured water. Martin gathered his documents with the steady, efficient movements of someone who has sat in rooms like this before and knows that the work continues after the drama ends. Trevor was still at the table. He had not touched his portfolio. He said, "Mom," just that, the same way he had said it the first Christmas he and Rebecca were married, when he had stood in my kitchen not knowing where anything was, and asked if he could help with dinner. I sat down beside him. He said, "I believed this was the right thing. She told me you were slipping. She said she'd watched you forget things, that she was scared, that Caldwell was the best in the county for this kind of planning." He stopped. "I never looked at the document myself, not really. I signed where Caldwell told me to sign, and I trusted that it was what she said it was." He put his hands over his eyes. "I treated you like a problem that needed solving," he said. "You were never that. You were never anywhere near that." I did not say anything for a moment. "Trevor," I said, "I know you weren't trying to hurt me. I believe that. But someone told you I was failing, and you believed it without asking me, without coming to me directly. You arranged things around me because it was easier than talking to me, and that. I waited until he looked up. That's the part we need to sit with, not today, but soon." He nodded. He left an hour later. He stopped at the door and turned back and said, "For what it's worth, whatever happens with Rebecca, I want you to know I'm sorry, and I'll make sure June's attorney in Terre Haute has anything I can provide." "Thank you," I said. "That matters." In the weeks that followed, the house on Clearwater Drive settled back into something that felt like itself again. Not the quiet of the first year after Harold. That quiet had weight to it, a held-breath quality I had never fully gotten used to. This was different, more like the house remembered what it was for. Wanda called every other day. Roy brought tomatoes from his garden when his plants finally gave out in October. Martin kept me informed on the proceedings without being asked, which is the kind of lawyer he is. Caldwell's license was suspended in November pending the bar investigation. A formal complaint had been filed with the Indiana Attorney General's Elder Financial Exploitation Unit by December. June's attorney in Terre Haute contacted me, and I spoke with her twice on the phone. She was sharp, steady, and very tired in the way of someone who has been fighting a long time. 2 other women came forward through the investigation, both of them referred through the investigation, both of them referred through Martin's network. None of them people I had known, all of them women who had been alone and had trusted the wrong person at a moment when they were still figuring out how to be alone. Paulette Voss was separately referred to the Indiana Supreme Court Disciplinary Commission. She had no paralegal license in this state and had been operating without one. Trevor and Rebecca separated in October. I learned this from Trevor in a short, careful phone call. He had moved to an apartment in Carmel. He was seeing a counselor. He said he was trying to understand some things about himself that he should have understood sooner. I told him that was worth doing, and I meant it. In November, I requested a cognitive evaluation voluntarily through the neurology department at IU Health in Indianapolis. I found the physician myself through a referral from my own doctor. The evaluation took 2 days. The results were unambiguous. No evidence of impairment, memory, attention, and executive function, all within the normal range for my age. The physician told me, with the dry amusement of someone who has administered these tests for 20 years, that I had caught 2 errors in the paperwork before she had. I framed the report, not because I needed to prove anything to anyone in particular, but because there are mornings, grey Indiana winter mornings, when the house is very quiet and the coffee is too hot to drink and the absence of Harold is a specific shape in the room, when I need to look at something concrete. Wondering is not the same as declining. I have to remember that. Rebecca called in December. She called on a Sunday, which was when she had always called, and I answered, which I had told myself I might not. She did not apologize exactly. She said she had been talking to someone and was beginning to understand how she had let fear about money become something else, something she didn't have a good name for yet. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her immediately. I said I didn't know yet what I was able to offer her, and that I thought honesty was more respectful than a reassurance I wasn't sure I meant. She said she agreed. We talked for 20 minutes. It was the most honest conversation we had had in years, possibly ever, and I did not know what to do with that except sit with it. On the first Sunday of December, I drove to the cemetery and sat with Harold the way I do when something large has happened, and I need to say it out loud to someone who won't try to fix it. The oaks were bare. The light was flat and grey the way it gets in Indiana in December, the sky the colour of old pewter, the ground hard under my feet. I told him about the supply room, the voices, the table with the documents laid out, Caldwell's face when Roy told him to stay seated, Trevor's hands over his eyes, Rebecca walking out through the front door. I told him the house was still ours. I told him I was all right. The wind came through the trees and the cold settled into my fingers, and I stayed until I was ready to leave. And then I drove home along the route I have driven for 30 years, through the downtown and past the school and over the little bridge on Clearwater Road, and I pulled into the driveway under the oak tree and went inside and made tea and sat in the kitchen in the quiet that is mine. If you stayed with me through all of that, and I'm glad you did, then I want to ask you something honestly. The thing that has stayed with me in the months since that Sunday afternoon is not what Caldwell had planned. It's not the document language or Paulette Voss or the $178,000 June lost in Terre Haute. Those things are real and they matter, and I am glad they are being dealt with. But the thing that comes back to me in the quiet is this. My daughter looked at my grief and decided it was a liability. She looked at my life alone and saw a gap that could be managed. And somewhere along the way, I had made it easier for her to do that by closing the door. After Harold died, I went inward. I always do when things hurt. It is the habit of a lifetime. I told Rebecca I was fine when I was not, because telling her the truth felt like asking for something I hadn't earned. I kept her at a distance in the way I keep everyone at a distance when I am not coping well, and I called it independence because that is what I have always called it. She looked at that closed door for 2 years, and what she saw there was not her strong, capable mother. What she saw was a woman who wouldn't let her in. That's not an excuse for what she did, nothing is. But it's a door I helped to close, and I have to live with my part in that. The people who build these arrangements, the Caldwells, the Paulette Vosses, they don't make something out of nothing. They find a gap. A mother and a daughter who stopped being honest with each other, a son who needed to feel useful, A woman alone in a house that had gotten too quiet. They bring a briefcase and a document, and they fill the space that love and honesty should have occupied. Don't let that space open up. Whatever it costs you to stay in the hard conversations, to say the thing you'd rather not say, to ask the question you're afraid of the answer to, it costs less than what comes in when you don't. Thank you for staying with me. If something in what I've shared felt familiar, if you've been in a room with someone you love and realized you didn't know them as clearly as you thought, I'd be grateful if you told me about it in the comments. I read everyone, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love for you to stay. I have more to share. See you next time. There's something I've been sitting with since that Sunday afternoon when everything came apart at my own dining room table, and I want to try to say it honestly, the way I wish someone had said it to me years ago. What happened to me didn't begin with Caldwell and his briefcase. It didn't begin with Paulette Voss reading document language through a supply room wall. It didn't even begin with Trevor, who genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. It began much earlier, in the small daily choices I made after Harold died. The choice to say I'm fine when I wasn't, to close the door when I should have left it open, to perform competence instead of asking for connection. I have thought about this carefully, and I keep arriving at the same place. The gap that Caldwell walked into was one I had helped to create, not intentionally, not maliciously, but the result was the same. I kept Rebecca at a distance for 2 years because being needed felt like being diminished, and she interpreted that distance as decline. She was wrong about what it meant, but I had given her something real to look at. That's the part that's hardest to sit with. Not what was done to me, but what I contributed to the conditions that made it possible. There is a kind of pride that protects you up to a point and then starts working against you, and I had been living inside that pride for a long time without examining it. What I know now, having come through the other side of it, is this: intelligence without honesty is just a sharper tool for deceiving yourself. I am not a woman who lacks for intelligence. I held my own in that dining room. I read Caldwell's document language before Martin did. I planned that Sunday afternoon with more precision than I had planned anything in years. And none of that intelligence had protected me from the slow drift that happens when you stop talking honestly to the people you love. Wisdom is not the same thing as being smart. Wisdom is what you build when you're willing to look at the parts of yourself that aren't working and stay in that discomfort long enough to learn something. Resilience, too, is not what I used to think it was. I used to think it meant not needing anyone, getting through things alone, without asking for help, without showing the cost. That is not resilience. That is armor. And armor is heavy, and it keeps out the cold, but it also keeps out the warmth. And after long enough, you stop being able to tell the difference. What got me through was not my own strength in isolation. It was Priya, who recognized something was wrong in my face and sat down beside me. It was Wanda, who answered before the second ring and listened without interrupting. It was Martin, who called me back within the hour. It was Roy, sitting in the corner armchair with 30 years of law enforcement and the quiet authority to say I'd stay seated if I were you. None of that help was available to me until I made myself available to it, until I picked up the phone, until I let people in, the people who build arrangements like the one Caldwell built. They look for the gap between what a person projects and what they actually need. They don't manufacture vulnerability from nothing. They find it where it already lives. The truest protection I had was not a legal document. It was the network of people who showed up on a Sunday afternoon because I finally asked them to. And the bravery was not in the confrontation. It was in the weeks before when I had to admit that I couldn't handle this alone, and then do the harder thing of not handling it alone. I hope that's worth something to you, wherever you are in your own story.